Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be doing part 95 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. And today I'm quite excited to get stuck into this one. We've got a couple remakes and some really cool animals that we get to have a look at today. A lot of mammals, a couple extinct animals, well, one extinct animal. So I'm quite excited to get stuck into this one. So we're going to be starting off today with a remake by Jen and Leaf. We've got the Lesser Flamingo here, so really beautiful animals here. So the Lesser Flamingo are a species of flamingo that is found in sub-Saharan Africa, or so basically every part south of the Sahara Desert, and western India. And these guys are the smallest species of flamingo, and they're thought as though as a normal bird, they're kind of tall and large and stuff like that, quite big animals, and really wonderful. This species typically ranges from 1.2 to 2.7 kilograms, or 2.6 to 6 pounds, and they have a standing height of about 80 to 90 centimeters, or 31 to 35 inches, with a total body length from beak to tail, and a wingspan in the same range of measurements from about 90 to 105 centimeters. And you can see here their plumage is mostly pinkish white here. And the clearest difference from these guys from the greater flamingo, which is other than size, but it's only really easy to tell apart when they're together. The other way to tell them apart is that the bill here is much more darker, or much more extensive black on the bill. And that's how you kind of tell them apart. So these guys are also thought of to be the most numerous species of flamingo. And the population is believed to have peaked at about 2 million individual birds, so that's quite a lot. And these guys typically feed on algae, anything really small that they can filter through their beaks, which is really cool. And although the presence of these flamingos near water bodies show that these guys typically like to hang around sodic alkaline waters, and these waters not really suitable for irrigation, so they're kind of a very visual cue for that. And although these guys are blue-green, even though the stuff that they eat is like blue-green in color, these algae that they typically eat has photosynthetic pigments, which really gives the birds the pink color. They're called carotenoids as well. And they have this deep bill here that's kind of similar to things like baleen whales that allows them to filter small organisms like algae and things like that through their bristles in their mouths and their beaks to filter out food, which is pretty cool. So in the wild, these guys are prey for a variety of different species, such as marabou storks, vultures, eagles, jackals, hyenas, foxes, pelicans, and big cats and eagles and things like that. And they're most numerous in Africa, and there's lots of breeding sites around Africa, around Estonia, Pan, and places like that. Though there have been some changes, but they're typically doing quite well over there. Like all flamingos, these guys will lay a single egg, or that's chalky white, on a mound that they build out of mud, and the chicks will join these creches, or large group of babies, after hatching. And these creches can reach to numbers of 100,000 individuals, so quite large. And the creches are also marshaled by a few adult birds, and they lead them on foot to water, which can be a journey up to 20 kilometers. And despite being the most numerous species of flamingo, they are considered near threatened because their population has been observed to decline, and they have a low number of breeding sites, which is a lot of them are threatened by human activity. So populations have been actually recently affected by like heavy metal poisoning, degradation of their habitat, and pollution. So that's been a really big issue for these guys, but they seem to be doing okay still. As I mentioned, they're considered near threatened. But yeah, really awesome guys. I'm a big fan of these guys here. So Jen and Leaf did a wonderful job with remaking that. And now we're moving on to another bird we've got by the Ginger Toast, who's done a really wonderful job. We've got the common crane, also known as the Eurasian crane over here. So these guys are a medium-sized species of crane, and they're actually the only crane commonly found in Europe beside the Demoiselle crane and the Siberian crane. And they're actually, along with the Bolga and sandhill cranes, they're one of the 4 crane species that is not currently classed as threatened or conservation dependent at the species level. So these guys are doing quite well comparatively to a lot of crane species, which is always a good thing to hear. In terms of their size, they're quite large. They're about 100 to 130 centimeters, or 39 to 51 inches long, with a 180 to 240 centimeter, or 71 to 94 inch wingspan. They also have a body weight range that can be from 3 to 6 kilograms, with being on average about 5 kilograms, which is pretty big. And these guys are, the males are typically slightly larger and heavier than the females, with weights showing the largest amount of sexual dimorphism. And these guys, as you can see, they're quite greyish overall, but they have this dark head with this white nape going down, and this small red crown going on there. That's quite similar to the hooded or blackneck cranes. So these guys are quite common, as their name implies. They can be found in northern parts of Europe, all across the Paleoarctic to Siberia, and they actually used to be as far west as Iceland, but they became extinct around Iceland and the UK about like 200 or 400 so years ago. However, they have since actually started to return to Iceland, and there have been introductions into Britain naturally, so they are kind of spreading that way, so they're doing quite well in that regard. And that's where they breed, but they winter in places like China, India, the Middle East, and parts of sub-Saharan and Northern Africa. So that's typically where they kind of spend their winters. They can fly in pretty large flocks as well. There can be groups of like 100,000 cranes and pairs and flying around and things like that, which is pretty interesting. And they are a long-distance migrant. So these guys will probably winter around August to October in the breeding areas, but they will move down to their wintering sites between late October and early December. So that's where they change. And actually, there have been some changes to their migration patterns due to climate change, which is always really interesting. So in terms of their habitat, let's see if we can find another one standing around here. So typically their habitat is predominantly breeds in like boreal or taiga forest, or even like mixed forest with elevations from sea level to 2,200 meters. But in more northern climes, they will breed on treeless moors and bogs and things like that. Even steppes as well, and Russia as well, they will breed on. And they are quite low density breeders, so you typically only be 1 to 5 pairs per 100 kilometers squared. And in the winter, these guys prefer like move into floody areas like sheltered bays and things like that. And during their flightless molted period, they have a need for shallow water with high reeds to basically be able to protect themselves. And later, after this migration period, they'll regularly winter in open countries, often in cultivated land and sometimes in savanna-like areas. So, like the Iberian Peninsula is a good example of that. And quite similar to most other species of crane, these guys are omnivores. They feed largely on plant matter, so like roots, stems, leaves, fruits, and seeds, berries, acorns, all of that stuff. But animal foods, especially during the summer breeding season, they actually may eat a lot more protein or more animals. They'll eat dragonflies, other small insects, woodlice, rodents, and small birds, basically anything they can get their mouths around. And they will typically forage for them in water using their bills to probe, but they will sometimes scavenge off crops and things like that, which is pretty cool. And in terms of breeding, these guys will usually lay their eggs in May, but seldom do they do it earlier later. And like most cranes, they have a breeding pair, but if one mate, they may try and court another female of the year, but they typically are in a mated pair, which is pretty interesting. The nesting territory can vary a lot depending on the local habitat. It can range from 2 to 500 hectares or 4.9 to 1,235 acres. And they actually often, along with sandhill cranes, they actually will paint their bodies in mud and vegetation to blend in with their natural environment. And they typically make their nest in a very near shallow water, often in dense or shore vegetation nearby. And this is usually taken over several years. The size and placement also vary a lot depending on the range and population, things like that. In terms of their clutch size, let's lose this as we talk about the babies. Let's move over to you, little man. Typically, these little guys will be laid in 2 eggs, but seldom one is laid, and even 3 or 4 can be laid. If the clutch is lost early in incubation, they may actually make another one within the next couple of weeks. But the incubation period is about 30 days for these guys, or about a month. And it's done primarily by the female, but occasionally both the male and female will incubate the baby. But if humans or will approach the nest, they will have a distraction display. But known ground predators that include domestic dogs, and include foxes, raccoons, things like that, whatever small animals that they live with. I don't know there's many raccoons in Europe, but whatever. These guys will like basically physically just attack them and rush them and say, "Get away from my babies," pretty much. New hatchlings for these guys are also quite helpless, but they're able to crawl away from danger within like just a few hours, and soon after hatching they can run with their parents. The chicks will respond to danger by freezing and use their camouflage to kind of hide as well like this, along with these cute little babies here. They'll use their wings to stabilize themselves while running, and while about 9 weeks of age they can fly short distances. And the adults will actually go through their pulse breeding molt while they're caring for the young, so they'll be flightless for about 5 to 6 weeks along with their babies. And the next breeding season, the previous year's flock, young actually just flock off together and just do their own thing. And the sexual maturity of wild birds has been estimated to be about 3 to 6 years of age. And also in terms of their longevity, these guys are quite long-lived. They're estimated to live to 30 to 40 years in captivity, and some they actually may breed quite a long. And they're typically the longevity is about 43 to between 43 to 12 years is like the captive cranes. They will live longer, and it seems like in the wild they generally live on average 12 years, but some might have shorter lives, for example. But these guys are also, when they're not breeding, they are quite social. They can form flocks of up to 400 birds, or even bigger ones like that, even like thousands of cranes. So they can be quite social. And they also have a kleptoparasitic strategy to recover from these reductions in feeding rate. And there's a rate they use to survival. So they often intake of common cranes during the day, kind of stop off and do their thing and then fly off again. So as a common bird, these guys are considered least concern. The population globally is estimated to be about 600,000, with the vast majority of them nesting in Russia and Scandinavia. But in some areas, have become rare to non-existent, especially Ireland, where they died off as a breeding species in the 18th century. But a flock has actually come to the County Cork in like 2011, and a smaller flock a year later, so they may actually started breeding there again. And there have been reintroductions in Great Britain from the Norfolk Broads by people trying to reintroduce them and try and help them breeding back in the UK, which is pretty cool. But as they mentioned, they're quite common. They're still threatened by a lot of things, such as habitat loss and degradation, by things like dam constructions, urbanization, expansion of agriculture, and the draining of wetlands. And although this has adapted to these in many areas, some issues in land use have really hurt these guys. But these guys can also suffer from pesticide poisoning, hunting, and egg collecting, which obviously hurts their populations. But luckily, they are kind of considered a important species. They are protected in a lot of places, and part of like agreements, such as the Agreement of the Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Water Birds, is kind of a big treaty that protects a lot of these species. But yeah, really, really awesome animals. Hope you love these guys. Really, really cool. So we're going to move on to another bird now. This was done by Ginger Toast. This next one's done by Monsoon. We have got here the Congo Pifal. So this is one of the 3 species of Peafowl. Let's see the beautiful male over here. So these guys are also known as the African peafowl. They're one of the 3 species of peafowl within the family Pavonidae, which is, and the only one native to Africa. And they're listed as vulnerable by the ICN, or near threatened. In terms of their description, they're quite a large bird. A peacock, or a male, can get to about 64 to 70 centimeters, or 25 to 28 inches long. And though they're not quite as impressive as their Asian cousins, as the green and common peafowl. These guys have like a deep blue and a metallic green and violet tinge to them, so they're still quite a beautiful animal, as you can see here. And they often has these crown feathers. You can see these white hair-like feathers, which are pretty cool. And the female is a little bit smaller. Let's see if we can find a female. There's a male there, female here. Typically a bit smaller, as you can see. They're a bit more brownish. They measure about 60 to 63 centimeters, or 24 to 25 inches in length, and they generally have that chestnut brown bird with the abdomen, things like that. And they kind of resemble like immature Asian peafowl. And they were actually thought to be immature Asian peafowl before they were described as their own species, which is pretty interesting. So in terms of their habitat, let's see if we can find another male to talk about, because these guys are quite beautiful. In terms of their habitat, these guys are endemic to the central Congo lowland forests of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they've been designated a national bird. These guys typically observe or live in primary and secondary forests in the Sengola National Park, but there have been signs that these guys have been more frequently encountered in regenerating secondary forests as well, rather than primary forest. And in terms of their diet, these guys are omnivores, so they'll feed on fruits and insects, and they've been known to eat things like multitude of insects, worms, a bunch of different fruits, oil palm, African breadfruit, things like that. And they actually showed in Sengola National Park, their diet is taxonomically narrower, so they don't eat as many varied things in secondary forests than in primary forests. And this actually may be this may just be because there's less things in a secondary forest than a primary forest. And the male also has quite a similar display to other species of peafowl, though the Congo peafowl actually fans its tail feathers, while other peacocks use their undertail covert feathers. And in terms of breeding, these guys are monogamous, though detailed mating information of these guys in the wild is actually still, we don't really know too much about them. And they produce a similar sound to other peacocks and things like that, so not too different. In terms of their conservation, these guys are near threatened. They are threatened a lot by habitat loss, which threatens a lot of species living in the Congo. And this is often caused by mining, shifting, cultivation, and also logging. And the wild population is estimated to be between 2,500 and 9,000 individuals. And given the regenerating forests for these guys in Sangola National Park, that actually may be really important for them in their conservation strategy. And there also are captive breeding programs in captivity, so they are well represented in captivity as well. So really, really cool. And before we move on quickly, let's have a look at the cute little babies, little friends right here. So awesome, little fellows. So next, moving on to another mod, we've got some mammals coming up now. We've got the Colombian red howler monkey by Leaf and General Pizza, as we can see here. Really, really cool animals. Let's see if we can hang out with you over here. So these guys, also known as the Venezuelan red howler, these guys are a South American species of howler monkey that can be found in the western Amazon basin in Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Brazil. And these guys, they don't have that much sexual dimorphism. Males will typically range from 49 to 72 centimeters long, and females about 46 to 57 centimeters long. And a male will weigh about 5.4 to 9 kilograms, and a female weigh between 4.2 and 7 kilograms. And they have a long tail there that's pretty much 49 to 75 centimeters. And the tail is pretty much covered with fur, except like the lower third, which is actually used for grasping and things like that. And the colors of both males and females, where they get the name, is kind of that reddish color, so they get that name, the red howler. And you can see here, the shade of it will also change with age, and they have quite stubby faces, as you can kind of see here, which is pretty cool. They also have quite a large jaw bones and large mandibles, which and also a very extended hyoid bone, which is the bone that is in the throat there that anchors your larynx. So that's where they get their kind of big booming from. It's one of the adaptations that they have, which is really, really interesting. In terms of their social groups, these guys live in groups of up to 3 to 9 individuals, though typically about 5 to 7 is the average. These groups are also polygamous, so there's usually only 1 or 2 males, and the rest of the females and their offspring, though there's one dominant monkey in the group who is the alpha male, and he's responsible for leading the group to new food sources and defending them. And the female in the groups are in charge of the offspring. There's also, in terms of their activity during the day, these guys are most active during the day, and particularly the morning, and this is where the group will often move to another feeding spot. They often are quite famous for their dawn chorus, and they have these loud howls and roars where they get their name howler monkeys. They can go through the forest at about 5 kilometers away, and they're usually performed by the males, who basically use it to say, hey, this is my area, these are my girls, don't mess with me. That's pretty much what it's all for. And it's also used to prevent confrontation, things like that, which is pretty cool. And in terms of their diet and dentition, these guys are folivores, so these guys typically feed on leaves, but they'll also eat small animals, nuts, fruits, seeds, and flowers, which are quite important to them. The most important part of their diet is leaves, and they cannot live with it for more than a week. And they eat both older and younger leaves, though the older ones tend to be more nutritious. And the howler monkeys are able to eat this fibrous diet because of their dentition and how their gut is kind of adapted to it. They actually have narrow incisors that help them ingest the leaves, and molars that are sharp and shearing crests that help them chew their food. They also have quite complex stomachs that allow them to digest things, and they have hindguts, large intestines that contain bacteria that help them digest, which is pretty interesting. And in terms of reproduction, they actually have quite fierce sexual competition, and as we do that, we'll talk about these cute little babies here. So what will happen is they will have an imbalanced sex ratio, so a female will attract a male by moving her tongue around to initiate mating, but if the male does not respond, she'll move on to another one. The average gestation period for a female is about 190 days or so, and the infant will stay with its mother for about 18 to 24 months, so about 2 years. Although males, after males reach sexual maturity, they'll be kicked out of their natal group, and they'll have to go find their own female. They must evade a foreign group, and often sometimes they kill the other leader of the group and actually kill the babies of that first male. So basically, every baby after him is pretty much his, similar to like how lions do it. But yeah, very very interesting animals, and they're often, of course, threatened by logging and habitat degradation, like most species from the Amazon and those forests of South America are. But still, really really beautiful. I think Leaf and Jono Pizza did a wonderful job with this guy. So we're going to be moving on next. We've got another one from Monsoon. We've got a really cute little guy here. We have got the Pygmy Hog, and look at these cute little guys here. So the Pygmy Hog is a suid, or type of pig, that is native to the alluvial grasslands of the foothills of the Himalayas, and can live up to about 300 meters elevation. Today, the only known population is known as Assam, India, and possibly a population in southern Bhutan. But these guys are considered endangered, and there's believed to be less than 250 of them. And they get the name the Pygmy Hog because of their small size. These guys get about 20 to 25 centimeters tall, or about 8 to 10 inches, and about 45 to 51 centimeters long, or 8 to 20 inches. And they have a short tail that's about 2.5 centimeters, or about an inch long, and they weigh between 3.2 and 5.4, or 7 to 12 pounds. And you can see here they typically have a brown coat with some dark hairs to make a little crest there, and iris, hazel brown iris, things like that. And they're really, really cool. So let's see if we can find one running around. There we are. So in terms of their ecology, these guys, or behavior, these guys are born kind of like a grayish pink color, and they become brown with yellow stripes as they go along their body length as they grow up. They're not that long-lived. They live for about 8 years, and they become sexually mature at about 1 to 2 years old. And they breed seasonally before the monsoons, and they give birth about after 100 days to a litter that can be about 3 to 6. And in the wild, they also make small nests by digging small trenches and lining it with vegetation. And during the heats of the day, they will stay within these nests. And in terms of their diet, these guys feed on roots, tubers, insects, rodents, and small reptiles. So basically, anything small enough that they can get their mouths around. But as I mentioned, these guys are critically endangered, or just endangered. They used to be widespread from the tall west grasslands from like the Ura Peninsula towards Nepal, and then northwestern Bengal into Assam. But in 2002, the only viable population was Manans National Park, which was estimated to be a few hundred individuals. And in 2001, it was estimated to be less. 2021, it was estimated there's only about 250 in the wild, or even less than that. But they are luckily protected, and there are reintroduction groups to projects to try and help the species. So they do have a really good future. Where they are is protected as a national park, so they just need some help to get their numbers up. Really, really cool little guys there. So now we're going to move on to a mod Dudmire Narwhaler. We have got here the Marsh Deer, which is a really cool guy here. So the Marsh Deer is actually the largest deer from South America, and they get about 2 meters or 6'6", and a shoulder height about 1.2 meters or 3'9" at the shoulder. These guys are also typically found in Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Brazil, and Paraguay and Uruguay. But they were formerly found through much of the tropical and subtropical parts of South America. They range from the Andes, south of the Amazon, west of the Brazilian Atlantic rainforest, and north to the Argentinian Pampa. But today their populations are sadly rather isolated to marshy lagoons and areas that included Peru. But luckily they are found in national parks and things like that, so they are doing okay. They are considered vulnerable by the IUCN. But you can see a lot of the colors that they have here. These guys are very large ears with white hairs lined with that, and they also have like a reddish and golden brown fur there with blackish eyes and long dark legs, with turns darker during the winter as well. And these guys, in terms of their head to body length, they're 153 to 200 centimeters or 5 to 6.5 feet long. And their tail is about 12 to 16 centimeters or 4 to 6 inches long. And their height at the shoulder can be between 100 and 127 centimeters or 3 to 4 foot tall. And one cool adaptation that these guys have, as we look at the female, is that they're actually able to... they have quite large hooves for their body size, and they have an elastic interdigital membrane in between their digits that actually it's actually quite useful for them to swim and walking across marshy surfaces. And similar to most other species of deer other than reindeer, only the males, as you can see, have these antlers, and they can get to about 60 centimeters or 23 inches long. And in terms of body weight, an typical adults, especially a female, can get between 80 to 135 kilograms, 125 kilograms, 176 to 276 pounds. Though bigger males can get a little bit larger and weigh up to about 150 kilograms or 330 pounds. So in terms of these guys' ecology, these guys live in by themselves or groups of up to 6, which is only has an adult male, and they typically like to live in marshy areas with water that's less than 70 centimeters deep. They are also quite swift swimmers in like areas with high vegetation density for predators to protect themselves from, and also to provide them food. But they are slightly migratory. They will move to areas during the dry season with more water, and they often congregate more during the dry season, with some freshwater ponds showing they have low density in these areas since they just can't support large populations of deer. And since these guys typically live near marshy areas and near aquatic habitats, their diet also includes a lot of these marshy plants, and there's been found that they eat up to about 40 different species of plants like this, and they also eat aquatic flowers and shrubs and things like that on floating mats and things like that. And they've been classed as a grazer browser for their food, and their actually diet will change between the dry season and the flood season depending on the availability of food. So in terms of their reproduction, let's see if we can have a look at the cute little babies here. In terms of their reproduction, their rutting season actually usually coincides with the dry season, but that can change from animal to animal. But they actually may use this for their advantage because the densities of marsh are usually significantly higher during the dry season, so they're able to go and hide themselves and find other deer more easily, which is pretty cool. And gestation in these guys lasts for about 271 days, and the offspring, which is normally one per female, but sometimes they can give birth to twins, are generally born through October and November, and the infant deer are usually born whitish, but they reach their adult colors or so after a year. But in terms of conservation, their only predators are the jaguar and the puma, but they don't actually really account for that much because jaguars and pumas are almost like basically voided from their habitats. The former major threat was poaching for the antlers, but this is under control. But now the biggest threat is kind of habitat change and changes in habitat. Also, like dams and areas that they have to move away because the dam kind of destroys the marshes and wetlands that these guys rely on. But there are also things like contiguous diseases from cattle that could be a problem, but they have been shown they're not affected by diseases like brucellosis. But there's luckily they live in a lot of protected areas, and they're still quite common and widespread. They're just not as widespread as they were. So reintroduction programs and things like that could definitely be help the species, and I think they're just generally quite awesome animals. So yeah, pretty cool. So next we'll be moving on to another cool animal here. This one was done by Leaf and Mega Game and Rex. We have got an extinct animal here, everyone's favorite. We love big extinct animals, don't we? This is Gestation, which means greatest beast. These guys are a genus of hyenodont from the family Hyenarollidae that lived in Africa, and there could be some paraphyletic. It's a paraphyletic group, so they're not actually a group together. It's just a bunch of animals that look alike, but not actually closely related to each other. And there have been hypotheses that a lot of these African hyenodonts may actually be Afrotheists, so related to manatees and elephants and hyraxes, which would be pretty interesting if that becomes true. And these guys are the only known species of the genus, the Megistotherium osteolatus, which means the greatest beast bone crusher, which is pretty interesting. Or crushed or bruised bone crusher. And these guys were from the early Miocene, and they have been found in places like the Ngorongoro and Mirabaro formations in Kenya, Egypt, Namibia, Uganda, and Libya. And they were named by Robert Savage in 1973, which is quite a fitting name for a guy to name the species, Savage. And these are the largest of all known hyenodonts, so they can get quite big. And like other hyenodonts, they have quite a large skull relative to their body. Their skull can get about 66.4 centimeters, or about 2.2 feet long, and their body mass has been estimated at about 500 kilograms, or a little over 1,100 pounds. And they have large carnassial teeth, the upper front molars, which is actually quite formidable for sharing actions to obviously bite through prey. And in terms of their paleoecology, these guys were from what was now known as the Sahara Desert, but it was much more fertile in the Miocene. And a lot of it was like grassland and forest, and rainfall was plentiful. And these large lakes and large grasslands supported lots of megafauna. which provided the species with a lot of prey, which is pretty cool. And it's actually believed that this particular species may have been quite especially adapted for hunting like lots of large African herbivores that lived there. It's like the perfect example is gomphotheres, which are a close relative of the modern elephant. They didn't get quite as large; they got to sizes like cow to rhino size, even a bit bigger than that. They were quite big animals, and there's evidence on bones that have been found with the fossils of these guys, so it suggests that these guys may have actually been scavenging or even hunting gomphotheres, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, really, really cool animal and really awesome to talk about. And you can see baby there, who's really cute. And then you have mum, really, really awesome. So that was done by Leaf and Mega Gaming Rex. Next, moving on to the this one's next one by Jaboy and Janora Pizza. We have got the Jaguarundi. So really cool animal here. So these guys are a wild cat that was native to the Americas. Their range typically extends from central Argentina to the south to northern Mexico and potentially into America through central South America, east of the Andes up there. So these guys are also kind of a really cool cat. These guys split off from pumas about 8 million years ago, and just really, really cool guys here. And they may have actually been living around places such as Brazil, like the Pleistocene around that time. And North America was also recolonized by South American cougars and jaguarundis about 10,000, 8,000 years ago. And yeah, so that's really, really cool there. These guys are a medium-sized cat, and they've often differ quite a lot from other neotropical cats, such as these small spotted cats of the genus Podopterus in their appearance. They have kind of two color morphs, as you can kind of see here. They have a uniform coat that's kind of like a red morph, as you can see here. And then up here, we've got the gray morph. So two different colors you can get the Jaguarundi in. But in terms of their body plan, they're really, really different. They actually show a lot of similarities to mustelids, such as weasels and otters. And they have an elongated body with a relatively short legs, a small narrow head with round ears, a short snout and a long tail. And they can get quite big. They've got a head to body length of about 53 to 77 centimeters, or about 21 to 30 inches. And they have a strong muscular tail that's about 31 to 52 centimeters, or 12 to 20 inches long. And being about twice the size of a domestic cat, they can get up to about, at the shoulder height, about nearly 36 centimeters, or about 14 inches at the shoulder. And they can weigh between 3 to 7 kilograms, or 7 to 15 pounds. Though there have been individuals that have been larger at about like 9 kilograms, or nearly 20 pounds. And males are typically slightly larger than the females. But in terms of their habitat, these guys live in quite varied habitats across South America and North America. Or Central America, probably the better term. They can live in tropical forests, savannas, mangroves, cloud forests, things like that. And these guys, unlike margays, ocelots, and onkillers, these guys like to live in open areas as well, though they do prefer areas with vegetation like cacti, things like that, which is difficult for predators to get into. But as I mentioned, they've got quite a large range. They became found from central Argentina to south and to northern Mexico, through Central and South America through the Andes. And it's believed that these guys potentially live in the US. And there has been a talk about a population that may have lived in Florida, that it could have been introduced and things like that, but neither here nor there. We'll have a look at mum while we talk about him. So in terms of their behavior and ecology, these guys are shy and reclusive species and have only been really cautious of traps as well, so we really only know how they move through radio telemetry. These guys are typically prefer hunting through daytime and evening hours, which is quite weird for a cat. And they actually prefer to be more diurnal than most other cats and things like that. They're also quite good swimmers and good climbers. They can jump up to about 2 meters in the air to catch birds. And they often prey for animals such as boa constrictors, cougars, and domestic dogs. And studies have actually mostly found jaguarundis either alone or in pairs, and pairs could be from a mother and older kittens and things like that, or males and females during the breeding season. And individuals in captivity have been found to be more friendly towards each other, but they tend to be large home ranges in the wild. So a home range for a female could be between 1.4 to 1.8 kilometers, 18 kilometers, or 0.5 to 6.9 square miles in females, while males have larger ones. They can be from 8 to 25 kilometers or squared, or about 3 to 9 square miles. But sometimes this changes a lot depending on the habitats. Obviously, habitat that's more rich in food will have smaller home ranges, and males will typically have larger home ranges than the female, because they often their ranges includes the ranges of a couple females for them to mate with. And they mark this territory, of course, by using their scratching, clawing on things, rubbing their heads, and using scents to things like that. They pee on things, similar to how most other cats do it, which is pretty interesting. And in terms of their ecology or diet, these guys typically feed on small prey less than a kilogram. So they'll feed on ground-feeding birds, reptiles, arthropods, frogs, rodents, small mammals, even poultry, marmosets, rabbits, opossums, even small deer they've been reported taking, but that's kind of like extreme. And they are generally generalist in that regard. Generally generalist, of course. So as we move on, we want to talk about the cute little babies here. So jaguarundis have been observed mating all year round, though it peaks depending on what part of the world you're in, because sometimes it's because they have such a large range. Estrus usually lasts about 3 to 5 days, and then obviously after that they have a gestation of about 70 to 75 days, with a litter about 1 to 4 kittens being born in a den, which has a dense thicket and hollow tree or something with similar cover. They're born with lots of fur, and their underside has white spots, but they disappear as they age. And the mother will start bringing solid food to the kittens at about 3 weeks of age, but they won't typically play with it until the mother usually eats it. Kittens are capable of taking solid food, like birds and guinea pigs, at about 6 weeks of age, and they reach sexual maturity about 1 to 3 years of age, and their lifespan can be up to about 15 years in captivity, though in the wild they typically probably live shorter amount of time, which sucks, of course, because these guys are really, really cool. In terms of their conservation, though, these guys are considered least concerned. Their populations are stable throughout most of their range, though they are kind of worried about some places they've been extirpated because of people obviously hunting them. The jaguarundi is actually not particularly hunted because of its fur or anything, because it's poor quality or low value. But main issues for these guys include things such as habitat fragmentation and prosecution for killing poultry, which is true sometimes. But they are protected in most places, and it's illegal to hunt them in most places as well, so they are doing quite well. That's why they are considered least concern. Really, really cool animals here. So, Genora Pizza and Gaboy did a wonderful job with bringing us the jaguarundi. But we're moving on next. We've got the maned wolf next, and this is a really cool animal I like talking about. So this is the maned wolf, or their name in Latin is Trypocyon brachyurus. They are a large canid from South America, and their name locally known as the Lobo gunera, which is really interesting. They are also closely related to the bush dog, which has the shortest legs of the South American canids, so that's quite interesting. These guys are also quite large. They're the tallest of the canids as well. An average adult weighs about 23 kilograms or about 50 pounds, and they can stand up to 90 centimeters or 35 inches toward the shoulder. And they have a head to body length of about 100 centimeters or 39 inches, with a tail adding about 45 centimeters or 18 inches. And they have these quite large ears, of course, which are about 18 centimeters or 7 inches long. They're also the quite tallest of the canids, so they have these long legs that are adapted for walking through tall grasslands that are in the native habitat. And they also have this reddish-brown coat that you can see here, and they get the name the maned wolf because of this black mane going down their neck and stuff like that. And they have been known to also have reduced carnassials and stuff like that. They're quite different in ecology, as we'll talk to. And they actually have a really distinct odor that smells like cannabis that they use to mark their territories. And they have earned the name the skunk wolf as well, which is pretty interesting. So in terms of their hunting and their territoriality, these guys are typically hunt in twilight. Their activity pattern is actually more related to humidity and temperature, similar to bush dogs. These guys will typically be active between 8 and 10 a.m. or 8 to 10 p.m. And on cloudy days, they will actually be active all day. And they like open field and foraging and more closed areas during the warmer days. And unlike most canids, like grey wolves, dogs, and hunting dogs and dholes, these guys are solitary and they do not really live in packs. They typically hunt alone between sundown and midnight, and they use their large ears to listen for prey and things like that. But they do live in monogamous pairs, and monogamous pairs will defend a territory that be about 30 kilometers squared or 12 miles squared, although outside of mating they actually only may meet rarely. Their territory is crisscrossed by paths that they can patrol, and several adults may congregate in the presence of a plentiful food source, such as a fire-cleared patch of grasslands that they'll be able to eat all the small vertebrates that come out of there and all that, which is pretty cool. And both actually males and females will use urine to communicate, to mark their hunting parts and things like that. And some people compare the odor that they make to cannabis or hops, and it's very likely because the substance that's very likely has a pyrazine, which is often found in both plants. and which is really cool. And actually, in Rotterdam Zoo, the smell actually once set a police on a hunt for cannabis smokers, but it was actually just the wolves, which is really interesting. But in terms of their habitat in the wild, they typically prefer grasslands, shrubberies, and forests. So quite generalist in that regard. And while we talk about reproduction, we can have a talk about this cute little guy here. So typically, their mating season starts from November to April, and gestation lasts for about 60 to 65 days. And the litter may have up to 2 to 6 of these black furred pups that are really really cute here, and they can get to about 450 grams. And they reach their full adult age at about 6 years, 1 year old. And during that first year, they actually have to rely on their parents' food. And there's not much known about the wild reproduction of these wolves, but we know a lot from the captivity. And they typically give birth in the northern hemisphere between October and February, and the southern hemisphere August to October. So this actually indicates that the photo period, or basically the time of day or day length, actually is really important for their reproduction, which is pretty interesting. And yeah, in terms of their longevity, it's believed that their estimates in captivity they can live up to about 12 to 15 years. So they are quite long lived. And there's one individual known from Sao Paulo Zoo that may have lived up to 22 years. So quite a long lived animal. So in terms of their diet, these guys are pretty omnivorous, so they eat pretty much everything. Their diet ranges from small to medium-sized animals, such as rodents and rabbits, and birds, even fish sometimes. But more than half of their diet is actually vegetable material that includes sugar canes, fruits, and tubers. And it's estimated up to 301 food items have been recorded being eaten by Maine wolves that include lots of plants and animal species. And they've actually been hunt their prey by digging holes, chasing prey, and jumping in, to catch birds. Though only about 20% of these hunts are successful. They've actually been known to pursue and hunt pampas deer, but they've been known to, and fecal samples show that they eat giant anteaters, bush dogs, and peccaries. But we don't know if they were hunted or scavenged. They just know that they ate them. And even armadillos are quite a common food source for these guys. And a really cool relationship that I like talking about is the wolf apple, which is a tomato-like fruit that is actually the most common food item for the maned wolf. Though in some exceptions, they actually can make up to 40 to 90% of the diet of a maned wolf. And the wolf apple is actually actively sought out by the maned wolf, and it's consumed throughout the year. And unlike other fruits, which can only be found during the raining season, and they can consume a lot of these fruits at a time. And actually, it's a symbiotic relationship because obviously the wolf gets a meal, but also the wolf apple was able to spread its seeds through the feces because the wolf walks around and poops, and the seeds pass through the wolf fine, and then they germinate and obviously have a better chance at spreading. So that is a really, really cool way that these guys are a good symbiotic relationship between the two species, which is often really cool. So as I mentioned, they have a symbiotic relationship with the wolf with the wolf apple, but other main wolves will actually also defecate on leaf-cutter ant nests, and the ants will actually use the dung to fertilize their fungus gardens as well. So that's another really interesting relationship that they have with termites and leafcutter ants, and also the wolf apple, which is also really cool. They're usually preyed upon by jaguars and pumas, but they're most often preyed on by jaguars, and they get all sorts of different parasites. In terms of their conservation, though, these guys are not really considered endangered. I think they're considered vulnerable, but they have a wide geographic range and are still quite common, but they are declining, and they are quite adaptable to people and hanging around, things like that. But the main reason for the decline of the species and making them vulnerable is because of deforestation, increased traffic in highways, and urban growth. But they seem to be able to migrate into more urban areas and survive well. But this actually brings them into contact with domestic dogs and things like that, which increases their parasite diseases and stuff that often lead to death. And this makes them kind of endangered. In some areas, they're considered more endangered than others, but there are conservation efforts to try and protect these guys, reintroductions, things like that. And yeah, one cool thing as well is that their human attitudes have really changed a lot about these guys. Some people think they're quite scared of them. In some parts of the world, they'll actually eat parts of the animal's body to cure things from like bronchiolitis, kidney disease, and even snake bites, and also believed to be good luck sometimes, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of traditions and culture around this animal, and luckily a lot of people do like them, so there is a big drive for conservation of this wonderful species. So Jen, Leaf, and Nick really did a great job with this guy, and Jen has obviously done a wonderful job remastering it, so it looks rather awesome. So I think this will be a very great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys liked and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.